ask Pratiksha to give the welcome address.
Good afternoon, one and all. A warm welcome to all of you for the 44th JP Memorial Lecture organized by People's Union for Civil Liberties. Today, we have Sri Aakar Patel, Chairman, Board of Amnesty in India, amongst us as our special guest to deliver the lecture. I extend a warm welcome to you, sir. I would like to also extend a hearty welcome to Dr. Suresh, National Vice President, PUCL India. Sorry, I also welcome Advocate Chandrasekhar, State Convener of PUCL Kerala. It is also my pleasure to welcome the ad hoc members of PUCL Kerala. Lastly, I welcome all of you who have gathered here. Thank you all.
It's a very warm evening for us because Mr. Aakar Patel is here to speak to us on a very, very scintillating subject. I am also happy that such a topic is being introduced in a hall which bears the name of our former Advocate General, Mr. MK Damodaran. You may not be knowing that Damodaran sir was also a human rights activist and a civil rights activist. He had started a forum named Jagrada, and I had the privilege to associate with that forum. So we should be happy to have this meeting in this hall which bears his name. I am not giving a lengthy speech because all are waiting to hear Mr. Aakar Patel. I would request Suresh to give the presidential address now.
Friends, it's my great pleasure to invite you all for this 44th JP Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Mr. Aakar Patel. Before I come to introduce Mr. Aakar Patel, a few words in terms of why 23rd March and why the JP Memorial Lecture on this day would be very important. It was on this day in 1977 that Indira Gandhi revoked the emergency and declared the decision to hold general elections. Okay. The declaration of revocation of emergency itself was a consequence of millions of young people who heeded Jayaprakash Narayan's call of total revolution and came out on the streets opposing Indira Gandhi. The situation we are living in today is not very different from what it was. In fact, it's much more dangerous today than it was at that time. But it was on that day that the consequence of a wide-scale movement that JP had started way back in 1974 and actually earlier in 1972 itself, where he challenged the dictatorial regime of Indira Gandhi and the type of politics that it represented, which finally pushed the government to withdraw emergency. So it is on this day that we celebrate it as Jayaprakash Narayan Day in recognition of the work that he has done. And we in the PUCL have been holding memorial lectures in the name of JP on this day. By and large, we request speakers who we invite to come on that day so that that day becomes important. It's like 26th January, you don't shift 26th January or 15th August. We generally try not to shift it. There have been few occasions in the last few years in which sometimes the dates have changed for a variety of reasons, including when the speakers fell ill or some other national event occurred. Luckily, this time 23rd happens to be on a Saturday, therefore not being very difficult for both the speaker and for people to attend. And I would like to, on behalf of the National PUCL, thank Mr. Chandrasekhar and the Kerala State Unit, which has revived recently, for very readily accepting to host the 44th JP Memorial Lecture this year in Ernakulam or Cochin. We've had a host of very, very eminent people who have delivered the lectures in previous times. We had Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi delivering the lecture about 6 years back in Bangalore. We've had Bhavar Meghvanshi, a very well-known Dalit writer, activist, poet, who delivered the lecture last year in Allahabad. We had Anuradha Basin, the editor of Kashmir Times, a great fighter for human rights from Kashmir, who had delivered the lecture some years back. We had also Michael Sward, Israeli lawyer, human rights activist of Jewish origin, whose ancestors came from Poland, who was working as a lawyer, human rights lawyer in Israel, taking up the issues of Palestinian people, both the recognized Palestinian people and the unrecognized Palestinian people. I'm making this distinction because there are two sets of Palestinian Arabs who are there. You know, those who are recognized and living in Israel, and those who are living in Gaza and the West Bank. So Michael Sward has been, though being a Jew, he's been amongst the foremost lawyers taking up this issue and fighting it. We had him deliver the lecture 2 years back. Okay. It was a very rousing lecture. I would invite many of you, the younger people, to please go to the PUCL website, or we can make it available through the PUCL Kerala unit. Okay. So we have had people like Pratap Banu Mehta, who's been delivered it in the last 10 years. Earlier lecture was delivered by Justice Tarkunde, by Mr. Kannabiran, by Justice Sudarshan Reddy, by Professor Rajni Kothari, some of the biggest thinkers, doers, and political persons in India. So it is in this long line of people who have delivered very, very visionary speeches that when we were discussing about who we should invite for this lecture, that we thought of Aakar. And I would like to, on behalf of all of you, say thanks to Aakar for accepting this. There's a little bit of a history behind why we decided to choose Aakar and for this lecture. Being in Kerala, okay, and being on the occasion of just before the 2024 elections, we asked us a question: what is it that we would like the lecture to focus on? Of course, the lecture topic is chosen by the lecture person who's delivering, but we generally give them a certain idea about what it is that we would like to speak. And we said that irrespective of whether BJP is going to come back to power or not come back to power, though it doesn't look like this could be a major change in that sense, even if they come back to power with a smaller number, what worried us is not whether the elections is going to end up in result A or result B. What is worrying us is the fact that there's a poison of hatred, the poison of division, the poison of an anti-democratic spirit, which many people, especially in educated sections that we all come from, have embraced. What does that mean to us? How do we, as part of the larger PUCL family, and this lecture is open not only for PUCL members, but other people also, how do, as concerned citizens who are working within the framework of the Constitution, what should we be working on in the next 3 years, 5 years? 10 years seems to be very far away. At least in the next 3 years, what should we be doing to safeguard democracy, to safeguard the Constitution, to safeguard the rights that we have got, that has been hard earned? Very few of us really know the type of debates that went in the Constituent Assembly. So today when there's a PIL saying the word secularism should be removed from the Indian Constitution, and that is being taken up for hearing, it's going to come up now. It's just a matter of luck that it has not come. It was to come up about 2 weeks back. It's coming up now at any point in time. And we were asking around people saying, do we know the history of secularism? There's so many lawyers here, how many lawyers know why this word secularism was left out in the Indian Constitution at the time of the Constitution making. Sadly, many of us do not know the history. We don't go back to those Constituent Assembly debates. This debate on whether you should use the word socialism or you should put the word secularism in the Indian Constitution was debated for over 3 to 4 months. And the Constitution makers had a deliberate idea as to what should be there in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. And they said that at the time of independence, the Constituent Assembly was set up in 1946, when India had not been partitioned. 47 partition takes place, and the killings that took place all across the border. And the choice was very clear, and the choice was, should India be a Hindu Rashtra, because majority of people are Hindus, or should it be something else? And not unanimous, but the major decision that was taken place at that time is no. We will not become a Hindu Rashtra. We believe in secularism. Now, the reason I'm pointing out is that the next part of the debate took place. This took place over 2 years, not 1 day, 2 days. A huge debate took place in the Constituent Assembly. And the same questions that are being raised today, we are all subject to many of these debates that are coming up in YouTube. That this word secularism owes its origin to Western secularism. I invite people here, please go back to our history. Go back to our history, because our Constitution makers debated, is the notion, one minute please. Our National Secretary, he's come from Coimbatore for this meeting. And the Constituent makers discussed and said, no, the concept of secularism as we are discussing is not the word secularism which is coming from Western Europe or which came up in England. Our notion of secularism is different. And they went on to discuss and debate about it. And they said that this secularism which we are putting into our constitution is not the secularism of the West. Now, we do not know, we do not go back to this heritage of this debate. It's very important in today's debate that we are able to counter false ideology, false politics, the false notion of what our constitution is with the true fact of what happened. It is in this context that when we are looking into it, Aakar is an old friend of us in the PUCL, that we felt that Aakar would be the right person to invite to give this talk. We needed to go back to some of those old things and in a visionary way. Because it's very easy today for many of us to become cynical. We had a discussion here a little while back. Youngsters are not coming. Youngsters are not interested in this. A lot of youngsters here, much more than normal, I'm seeing here. So I'd like to congratulate the PUCL Calicut, the coaching unit. You've got a lot more youngsters here. But this very innate thing in human rights circles to become pessimistic, to become cynical, no change can take place. But I think change is taking place. We need to be optimistic. They can take away anything from us, but they should never be able to take our sense of idealism. But that idealism is what the Constitution makers gave us. Can you imagine in 1949, when the Constitution was written, when they gave adult franchise to people who were not educated, there was a discussion. You can't trust illiterate people to vote. And our Constitution maker said, no, in a future India, they will learn to become mature. How do you become mature unless you give them the right and you trust them with the right? This word of trust, that you trust in the wisdom of the people. I think these are the type of values that embodied the Constitution, not just the words that you read in the preamble, but the history and the spirit which went behind it. It is in this context that we then said, we will ask Aakar to talk. To introduce Aakar Patel to you all formally, Aakar is from Gujarat. He was in Surat. He is a journalist, author, activist. Some of his books are outside, so those of you who may want to pick it up. Okay. He was with several things. He is right now chair of the Amnesty India board in India. He has written a number of books, but before he became well known as a book writer, he also worked in several publications. He was the editor-in-chief in Surat of Divya Bhaskar, a Gujarati daily from there. He was also the deputy editor of Deccan Chronicle and an editor-in-chief of Midday Multimedia. He's very famous for his books, Our Hindu Rashtra, which talks about majoritarianism, which was published in 2020. The Price of the Modi Years, 2021. It's a very, very important book where he looks into the larger economics of what the Modi years have represented. And then, of course, there are several other books that he has come out with. Beyond all this, one quality of Aakar, which I think I would like to bring to this forum, is the fact that Aakar is not somebody who's just a writer. He's not somebody who just comes and gives a bhashan in a hall. He's a man who walks the talk. As I would like to say it, he puts his foot where his mouth is. Okay? He is not somebody to run away from a fight. Okay? And he is not afraid to take risks. And let me tell you that he has taken risks for his conscience. I mean, he was head of the Amnesty India, and you know Amnesty is famous for its Prisoners of Conscience program. That's how it got formed. So, in a way, he is a prisoner of his conscience, and he didn't let go of the conscience. Okay? He was stopped twice when he was wanting to leave India, when he was invited to go and give a lecture in US universities. He was stopped just as he was about to catch his flight to the US. And it was twice, not once. He fought it, he went to the court gave an order. The government of India, obviously, you know how our government of India now is. This all happened in the last few years. They said the court can give anything, but we are not bound by the court. They stopped him a second time. He filed yet another case, and he wanted compensation to be given from the officer the investigating officer who was involved with that. And he didn't wait for it. The case is, I think, still going on. It's over. But he didn't go on. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is also to point out to the fact that it's very easy at this point in time to say, why get into all this trouble, leave it and go. But he is one person who said no. Okay, I don't go look out for a fight, but if a fight is coming my way, I'm not going to run away from it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Aakar, okay, he's a fighter, he's a visionary, and he's a person, in a way, he's a chronicler of the last 10 years. In fact, his writings are actually a chronicle. Okay, like Gabriel Marquez talked about chronicles of a death foretold. He's in a way a chronicler of what is coming. So let's hear from the chronicler himself, Aakar.
Like Indian democracy, I'm hobbled and tottering, but still standing. Thank you to PUCL, to Chandrasekhar and PUCL Kerala, Kavita, Suresh, Arvind, for asking me. PUCL is, I think, one of our most important bodies. It shows what the citizenry can do. And we are not very good as a people at forming institutions that last and at forming institutions that are not captured by a family or by an individual. We are not very good at founding institutions that have long-term credibility, that stand on the edifice of democracy. PUCL is one of them, one of the very few that we have. We should all be very proud of it. I certainly am. And I think it has a very big role in what is happening before us and what is to come. I've made some prepared remarks. Before that, I was just thinking a little bit about what was said by Suresh on the Constitution and secularism. And that was not part of what I had written, so I thought I could just begin by that. So till 2008, Nepal was a Hindu Rashtra for its constitution. It was a Hindu Rashtra in two ways. The first way was that executive authority came from a Kshatriya king, the Kshetri dynasty's kings who were born, they claim Kshatriya ancestry, so power would come from them, whether it was legislative power or whether it was executive power, as has been prescribed by the Smritis. The second way in which it was a Hindu Rashtra, this is the only other way in which it was a Hindu Rashtra, is that in the court of this Kshatriya king, there was a Brahmin called the Mool Purohit who would guide or advise the king on how to rule. These are the only two ways by which Nepal defined itself as being a Hindu Rashtra. There was nothing else from the Smritis. I come from the Patidar community. We are Shudra by caste. So in Smriti terms, we would be denied the right to education. We don't wear the Janeu, obviously. and so on. Nepal did not uh, adopt any of those practices because it could not. We are not living in the first millennia. We are living in 2024. Even in 2008, it would not have been possible for Nepal to have done what the Smriti texts tell such a kingdom, such a Hindu Rashtra to do. My point is that there is no end state that the BJP or the RSS have when it comes to a Hindu Rashtra. We don't even have a hereditary king that we can hand it over to and make this place the sort of kingdom that Nepal had been. Who will be the person in the court who will guide such a king, even if we had such a king? We don't have anybody. The exclusion or removal of words from the preamble will not mean that we will not continue doing what it is that those who wrote the Constitution wanted us to do, which is be a secular republic. That is the only way in which a modern state can function. There is no other way. Pakistan tried another way, and we can maybe discuss that in the Q&A if we have time. I'll begin my prepared remarks. And to do so, I think to understand where we are in 2024, we should survey the problem, even if the problem is familiar to us. And I think that it will be familiar to most of us here in this gathering. That we have a ruling party that believes thrives through and is motivated by a very fierce nationalism that is inward focused. So usually nationalism tends to be outward focused. If you look at German nationalism in the 30s, it was about the conquest of Western Europe. It was about expanding the country towards the east. It was about the fact that more land was needed for a growing population. Most of the Second World War, the German armies spent outside of Germany. So it's only in 1944, 1945, when the war ends, that the German army returns to Germany. All the years from 1939 onwards were spent in France, were spent in Poland. Pakistan, it's aimed inwards at Indian citizens, particularly Indian minorities, especially Indian Muslims. This Hindutva nationalism is expressed in three ways. The first is through exclusion, and by that I mean a political exclusion, that we have, India has 200 million Muslims, likely more because we haven't done a census since 2011, which means that 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 of us is born a Muslim. There is no Muslim minister in India's union cabinet for the first time in our history. There is no Muslim MP from the ruling party, whether in the Lok Sabha or in the Rajya Sabha. This is about 400 MPs in all. There was none in the last Lok Sabha either. There is one Muslim BJP MLA in India of the over 1,000 MLAs there. The person was last year in Tripura. When Jinnah accused the Congress, rightly, of being a Hindu party, at that point in time, before 1947, the Congress had 3% of its membership as Muslim. The BJP has fewer than that. This exclusion by India's most popular political party of one community has meant that today there is no Muslim chief minister in our 28 states for the first time. And that has happened because we have denied democracy to Kashmir, which is the only part of South Asia, I should point out, that is not governed under a democracy at the moment. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, Lanka, everywhere else, Nepal, you've got democratically elected government except in Kashmir. There's no Muslim in CM in 28 states. In 15 states in India, there is no Muslim minister at all. And this also goes back to the dominance of the BJP. the print, which is Shekhar Gupta's Morgan Online, had done a survey. In 10 states, there is one Muslim minister normally given the minority affairs portfolio. So it's like something, it's like a scrap that you throw. The question is, what is the purpose of this exclusion of Muslims? What does the BJP, what does the RSS hope to achieve by it? The answer comes to us through a speech that the Janasangh leader, he was the leader of the party that became the BJP. He died in a train accident in the 60s. He made a speech in Pune in 1965 where he says, and I'm quoting him now, "Our quarrel is with the way Muslims behave, coupling political ambition with religious zeal. This is why this war is not religious, but political. There is only one way to defeat Muslim bigotry, and it is to politically defeat them. That is the real solution of the Muslim problem. So long as they are not politically defeated, the rot will continue to grow. Only such a defeat will make them have second thoughts, and the process of Hindu-Muslim cooperation will begin. There need not be any doubt as to whether this political problem should be solved or not. It will have to be solved, and there is only one way in which it can be solved. It can't be solved unless and until Muslims are politically defeated," end quote. So this appears to have been achieved by the BJP under Modi, that we have defeated successfully Muslims. They have no participation in government. But after that, what? That we don't know. That Dindayal Upadhyay did not tell us what would come next. The second expression of the three of this inward-facing nationalism is persecution through law and policy. So since 2014, we've seen a series of actions from the BJP, whether through the union government and its laws or through the BJP in the states and its laws. Beef lynching as a category of violence, I had not heard about in my decades as a journalist till 2015. So it begins after the Prime Minister makes speeches against what he calls the Pink Revolution, and then two states that are then controlled by the BJP, they still are, Maharashtra first and Haryana. They pass laws that criminalize the possession of beef. This has nothing to do with the constitution and the protection of cattle. It has to do with the physical possession of beef, the meat. And burden of proof is reversed, and I'll come to that later. But once these laws were passed and they became this raised the awareness of beef as a national issue, the violence began, and it has continued. I think many of us might feel that we don't see that sort of story in the media anymore. One reason is that in newspapers, particularly, once something becomes commonplace, it goes away from the front pages, it goes to page 2, page 3, soon it goes to page 14, 15. Very often it doesn't become news at all, but the violence continues. I've documented it in one of my books. The reversal of burden of proof is interesting because it has made the judiciary quite demented in some ways. So there was in Gujarat in 2019, the punishment for cattle slaughter was made life imprisonment. Now, remember that cattle slaughter is supposed to be an economic crime. It is not a religious crime. The ostensible reason why we have these laws is that we are trying to protect cattle because the country is short of milk, which it's not, because we are a net exporter. But this is what the Constituent Assembly debate said, that we are trying, that this law is there not because of the sentiments of Hindus, but because of the fact that we need milk. So a man in Gujarat, Muslim man obviously, was accused of serving beef at his daughter's wedding. This is 2019. The police could not prove that this was the case. The judge sentenced the man to 10 years, saying the police can't prove it. It's your duty to show that that meat that had been consumed or not consumed was not beef. The man could not do so, and he got 10 years. The interesting thing is that the judge was actually following the law. That's what the law says. It's not for, if I'm caught with a smoking gun in my hand and there's a body next to me, it's for the police to show that committed murder. If I am accused of having beef in my fridge or in my van, it is for me to prove to the state that this meat was not beef. In 2019, we saw the CAA law, which for the first time, in the opinion of many, including me, believe that there's a violation of Articles 14 and 15 through the exclusion of Muslims in the CAA. That law has since been implemented. What has not happened is that the promised NRC, it has been put on hold in Assam, where it was a fiasco for the reason that the BJP assumed that most of the 19 lakh people who had been left out of the list would be Muslims. They were not. Muslims, because they are minorities and they are threatened, will likely have paperwork in better order than those who are not threatened and don't know what the dangers are of the things that the BJP is doing. That's possibly one reason why there were much fewer of them, still about 3 or 4 lakh, than the BJP thought there would be. And once that happened, the BJP dropped the idea of the NRC in Assam, having created such a gigantic mess. It tends to run away from the problems because the party hasn't thought through what it is doing, and never has and continues not to do so. After 2018, in 7 states in India, marriages between Hindus and Muslims have become criminalized. So if I as a Hindu want to marry a Muslim, we have to fill out a form in these 7 states, including the state that I am in right now, Karnataka. And the district collector or the magistrate will decide whether the marriage will happen. The state retains power in places like Madhya Pradesh to undo marriages, including marriages that have children. The other interesting thing about these laws is that the testimony of an adult woman that she changed her religion of free volition is not sufficient evidence for the state. It is for the man she's marrying and the family she's marrying into that need to prove to the government that she was not coerced. And all of these laws, of course, obviously also come with criminal punishment. Muslims are the only part of the population for whom divorce is a criminal wrong. For the rest of us, it's a civil wrong. The Supreme Court said in 2017 that triple talaq offered in one sitting was invalid, which meant that if it were offered, it would not result in divorce. After that, in 2019, Parliament criminalized the utterance of those 3 words by Muslim men. The situation is this, that if I, as a non-Muslim man, were to be accused of saying the words talaq, talaq, talaq to my wife in one sitting, we would not be divorced, it would not be a crime. If a Muslim man were to be accused of saying the same 3 words to his wife, they would not be divorced, but it would be a crime. We have criminalized the utterance of words and a non-act. Normally, crimes or potential crimes are punished. Here, a non-act, something that hasn't happened, the divorce has not happened, that is being punished. In 2019 again, and I'm going through the dates because it's important to know that these are all recent things, that these are not things that have been inherited by India. These are not natural things. These are things that are being imposed on us, regularly speaking, by this government that has come to power in 2014. Gujarat tightened the Disturbed Areas Act, which is an old law. But what it says, what it means now is that in all of Gujarat's cities, Hindus and Muslims cannot rent and buy property from one another with the permission of the government. So if a Hindu and a Muslim want to rent or buy property between one another, they have to fill out an affidavit that reveals their religion. The collector or the district magistrate will approve of it, and the government will be mindful of what the law says is improper clustering. That is the phrase that is used in the law. In effect, what it means is that foreigners can buy and rent property in Gujarat's cities where Gujarati Muslims cannot. The law, of course, tends to be challenged sometimes, not with a great deal of spirit, by the principal opposition party, which is the Congress. And the Supreme Court or the other constitutional courts either choose not to hear it, not to hear these laws, or to perhaps take in the petitions and not go through with what they really ought to be doing. I refer to Kashmir as being the only part of South Asia not under, by the way, Assam yesterday passed a similar law like the Gujarat law, and for 3 months, till the end of polling, presumably, in the state of Assam, Hindus and Muslims cannot rent and buy from one another. This was passed yesterday. There are sort of other things that we reserve for Muslims. This weapon for crowd control that's used in Kashmir, which is called the pellet gun, which is actually a 12-gauge shotgun. It fires bird shot out of unrifled barrels. Beyond the point, beyond 20-30 meters, the shot scatters, and it can't be controlled because there is no rifling. It has blinded 1,000 people, including infants who were nowhere near the scene of a protest. I'm told that that weapon was used most recently in Punjab during the farmers' protest, but that would be the first time it would be used outside of Kashmir. So this deliberate passing of law and policy, the first bit I spoke about was exclusion in terms of politics. This second bit is about law and policy. It has produced an atmosphere, in my opinion, I'm not a social scientist, but I think that it has produced an opinion where it has become acceptable to discriminate against and to tolerate and to condone violence against Muslims, which is the technical definition of what hate speech is intended to do. It is supposed to go after the community and its rights. And we can see that in many ways. I think the BJP has given up one of the fundamental principles of modern government, which was described as the monopoly over the use of force. That the modern state is described as one where only the government, only the state has the right to use force, which is why murder or rape, physical violence is a crime against the state. It doesn't matter whether the victim wants to press charges or not. The police will file the FIR and prosecute, because the person who perpetrates the violence has committed a crime not just against his or her victim, but also against the state. Under the BJP, I think that the state is letting go of some of this monopoly over violence. And by that I mean that if, say, the government in the National Capital Region assigns public space to migrant Muslims for prayer because they don't have a mosque of their own, a mob can come and veto the government, which a mob did, and the government had to withdraw its policy because it was afraid of the violence. So that would be an instance of the state giving up its monopoly. And part of this also has resulted in things like the blaming of Muslims for the spreading of COVID, for the Delhi pogrom, in which they were apparently also the perpetrators, but also the primary victims. And because this mindset, in my opinion, has been made acceptable, it will continue to spread. I think Suresh said that no matter where 2024 goes, this is not something that we can just assume will wither away in time. It has permeated into society, into media, and it will remain there till it is actively fought back against it. The third way in which the BJP expresses, the BJP's inward-facing nationalism expresses its hatred is by celebrating Muslim persecution. That Amit Shah's office, he personally will approve of the release of convicts who have raped and murdered because of the fact that their victims were the Muslim. That's the only reason why these people were let out of jail. That a union minister will call convicts who have been sentenced for lynching a person because the victim is a Muslim. We have sufficient instances of members of parliament who abuse Muslims openly and are rewarded in given ministries. The world has looked away. I think that for many decades, the world there was some sense of an external interest in what India was doing to itself. And the world would take notice when things like Pokhran would happen, or the Delhi pogrom of 1984 happened against the Sikhs, or Gujarat happened. Modi was on a list of one. The USCIRF, which is a body, a bipartisan body in the US, which looks at the persecution of minorities globally, it put Modi on a list where he could not travel to the US. This was after 2002. So the world had taken interest in the country in some sense, but I think that because of the rise of China in the last 20 years, and the thought that India might be some kind of counter or some kind of pivot in the Western strategy against China, and the fact that India is thought of as being a potentially lucrative market space for Western products and services. That's one reason why we think, people who work on this, we think that there is less focus on India while such egregious things should have happened. So these are the three elements to go from the bottom. One is the celebration of the persecution, the laws and policies, and then the exclusion. The second element of the BJP's inward-facing nationalism, I think, has not received as much attention as the first, and it is the party's hostility to federalism. And I think it is a posit that we should speak of this at this point in time in this week when the Chief Minister of Delhi is in jail. I wanted to tell you where it comes from. So what follows is a quotation from an article by M.S. Golwalkar, which was published in the Organizer just after the reports on the state's reorganization committee was formed in 1956. The article is reproduced in his book, Bunch of Thoughts, Part 3, Chapter 18, and it is headlined, Wanted a Unitary State. Golwalkar writes, and I'm quoting him, "Then came our present constitution, converting our country into a number of almost distinct units with a state of its own and all federated into one union. When one pauses to think of the conditions in which makers of this constitution lived when they framed this constitution, one sees that the atmosphere then was extremely congenial to the formation and the evolution of a unitary state. One country, one legislature, one executive center running the administration through the country. But mind and reason of the leaders were conditioned by the obsession of federation of states, where each linguistic group enjoyed a wide autonomy as one people with its own separate language and culture." So this is how he puts the problem, that you could have had a unitary state with only one legislature and only one leader. But you chose not to. And his solution to this, the subhead of this is, there is a levity. He says, quote, "Towards this end, the most important and effective step will be to bury deep for good all talk of a federal structure in our country's constitution. To sweep away the existence of all autonomous or semi-autonomous states within one state, that is Bharat, and proclaim one country, one state, one legislature, one executive, with no trace of fragmentational, regional, sectarian, linguistic, or any other type of pride being given a scope for playing havoc with our integrated harmony. Let the Constitution be re-examined and redrafted so as to establish this unitary form of government," end quote. So he wants Article 1 of the Constitution to be abolished, which is that India shall be a federation of states, and for it to be a single legislature, single executive. No Tamil Nadu, no Kerala, no Gujarat, no Madhya Pradesh. Only one state, Bharat, one legislature in Delhi, and one leader. The second source that I want to quote from on this subject is Deen Dayal Upadhyay, again, the man we heard before. So Article 3 of the BJP's constitution, the BJP's party constitution, says that integral humanism shall be the basic philosophy of the party. And integral humanism is a name given to a set of 4 lectures that Upadhyay gave in Bombay between April 22 and April 24, 1965. Neither bunch of thoughts, which is Goldwalkar's main work and perhaps only work, if we were to believe them that we or our nation would define is not his work, and integral humanism are not written, they are not books. They are a series of talks, a series of interviews in the case of Goldwalkar. There is no written text that the BJP has, but these 4 lectures are what the BJP says in its own constitution are the basic philosophy of the party. So the quote is from the 3rd lecture. The headline is "Constitution cannot be arbitrary," and the quote is the Constitution too not subject to some principles of a more fundamental nature? We have a written Constitution, but even this written Constitution cannot go contrary to the traditions of this country. Inasmuch as it does go contrary to our traditions, it is not fulfilling dharma. That Constitution which sustains the nation is in tune with dharma. There is no recognition of the idea of Bharat Mata, our sacred motherland, as enshrined in the hearts of the people. According to the first para of the Constitution, quote, India, that is Bharat, will be a federation of states, unquote. That is Bihar Mata, Banga Mata, Punjab Mata, Kannada Mata, Tamil Mata, are all put together to make Bharat Mata. This is ridiculous. We have thought of the provinces as limbs of Bharat Mata and not as individual mothers. Therefore, our constitution should be unitary instead of federal, close quote. This particular aspect of the BJP's ideology has manifested itself in some ways after 2014, and I'll just go through some of them. One is the use of union agencies to intrude into law and order, which is ostensibly a state subject. I don't know how many people know this, but after GST, the right of Indian states to tax has gone. Kerala can no longer raise taxes on its own, except on a very limited board, which includes alcohol and fuel. And the dependence on the union for revenue or for resource has become total, which did not used to be the case earlier. Including now, by the way, for those states that were or were close to being net revenue generators and might have run a surplus. Now that doesn't count anymore, because the union will determine how much money is sent to the state. And it has nothing to do with the state's own capacity, the state's own ability, or the state's own success. The call for one nation, one election also comes from a similar heeding of the BJP's thrust on federalism not being a good thing. And the union's attacks, as we've seen in the case of Kejriwal, Sisodia is also in jail and has been in jail for a long time. And the leaderships in Bengal, Jharkhand, the Jharkhand CM is in jail. Karnataka, Telangana, this week, the Telangana former Chief Minister's daughter, who is, I think, an MLC, was sent to jail. Under PMLA, by the way, once again, so you've got a reversal of burden of proof. If the prosecution opposes bail, the person pretty much stays in jail. So just like Umar Khalid or the people from the Bhima Koregaon 16, many of whom have spent 3, 4, 5, 6 years in jail, it is possible and perhaps likely that people like Sisodia, Kejriwal will spend that length of time in jail without conviction. This is just trial and pre-trial, merely because the Supreme Court chooses to go along on bail issues with what the executive wants. This is not tenable in a democracy. We are building up to a point where we will have some kind of a conflict. But there is a second problem here when it comes to federalism, that the Women's Reservation Bill was passed last year, and it is to be made operative after census and a delimitation. For 5 decades after 1971, that was the last time when the number of seats in the Lok Sabha was changed, India ignored delimitation as an exercise. And the reason is that 50 years ago, in 1971, the 85 MPs from UP, Uttarakhand was part of UP then, represented 10 lakh citizens each, on an average. But so did Kerala's 20 MPs. They also represented, on an average, about 10 lakh citizens each. And Tamil Nadu's 40 MPs, and Karnataka's 28 MPs, and Rajasthan's 25 MPs, across the country, while the larger states like UP had more seats, 85 seats, Kerala only had 20, but the number of people each MP represented was pretty much the same. That has changed in 50 years. Today, 50 years on, Kerala's population has increased by 56%, but Rajasthan's by 166%. Tamil Nadu's by 75%, but Haryana's by 157%. So what used to be one person or 10 lakh people, one MP ratio no longer applies. It is, of course, the case that the southern states should not be punished for either effective implementation or the population's own consciousness of what fertility rates ought to be. And I think the latter is likely more true than government interventions. But it is also a fact today that the northern MP today represents many more people, many more Indians than the southern MP. And that cannot be looked away from either. Today, Bihar's 40 and UP's 80 MPs represent on an average 30 lakh Indians, whereas the average Kerala MP represents 17 lakh, and the average Tamil MP 19 lakh. This will need to be addressed in a way that the southern states are not punished or don't see themselves as being punished. But of course, the BJP's power center is the north, so it will do what benefits the party. One possible solution, to my mind, the only possible solution is greater autonomy, that you remove from the union those powers which will mean that the southern states don't feel discriminated against on things such as taxation, but that's already been removed from them. So where does the solution then lie? And these are states that are the size of nations. UP is bigger than Bangladesh, Tamil Nadu is bigger than France. Gujarat, which is not that big, is bigger than Britain. Pakistani Punjab is the size of Mexico. But they have, the states on our side of the border don't have any power to tax. They don't have any autonomy, they don't have any agency. The question is, what can be done to resist these two thrusts of the BJP? One on the side of its persecution and exclusion of minorities. The second on the side of its hostility towards federalism. Internal mechanisms in India of opposing authoritarianism have never worked well. I think Jayaprakash Narayan was an exception, but what he could have done in an age of CBI and ED, we don't know. Power was available to the union, but there seems to be some element of restraint that was there earlier of not looking on the opposition as being the enemy, which I think seems to have gone now. So what can stop, what can put pause to what the BJP is doing and seeks to achieve further? I think the political opposition tries, but it's not easy, to be fair to them, to resist majoritarian politics. When you do divisive politics and you polarize people, the pole on which there are more people will normally win. Which is why the BJP continuously has to think it should polarize. If it became suddenly inclusive and would have maybe a fifth of its ministers as Muslims, it could no longer polarize. It would no longer be beneficial to the party in the sense of the electorate, and which would necessarily be something they would not do. the parliament has become more of a building than a sort of institution. I don't think there are people in India that take parliament, the institution, seriously. It doesn't have the capacity to be able to push back against an authoritarian executive like parliaments elsewhere can, I think. Maybe in the UK they can. Here it can't. The judiciary sometimes stands up for liberty, not often, and certainly not very often when the union has a stake in the case. I think when the union has a stake in the case, the judiciary tends to vanish. The bureaucracy, the police and the diplomatic corps show almost no spine, including when their own people are persecuted. A lot of very brave officers in Gujarat, Rahul Sharma, Satish Verma, who stood up for citizens, for individuals, for minorities during the pogrom in 2002, were persecuted. They were hounded out of office, some of them sent to jail. And the rest of the police force, the IPS, was not able to do anything, or chose not to do anything. So despite recognizing that these are the problems, of course, we must and continue to utilize the space that is available to us, whether that space is political, judicial, or legislative, institutional. And this is important because in many ways, I think civil society is the critical element in offering a new direction to the suicidal one which we have chosen after 2014. And while civil society in India is small, it is vibrant. I think that it has been oppressed quite a lot, but it remains defiant. It is also the only part of our society, I think, that is ideologically invested in opposing authoritarianism and communalism, much more than the opposition is. And it is also willing to pay a price for it, though, to be fair to the opposition, they are also paying a very severe price for going up or being a threat to the BJP, as we can see in the instances of the Congress bank accounts or what has happened to Kejriwal and Soren. The two major civil rights victories of our time, or the two biggest ones, have both come from civil society. They haven't come from judiciary, or they haven't come from the political opposition. The pulling back of the farm laws and the pushing back, the scrapping, I should say, of the NRC. It happened because of mass protest and the capacity to mobilize at a level which even Gandhi would not have seen. I don't think Gandhi's satyagrahas involved either sustained numbers of the sort that the farmers' protest had, or as large a volume of numbers across the country as the Shine Bagh movement had. One of the things which separate these two is that they seem to, in some sense, have become bigger than merely community-based protest. That in our part of the world, there is a word in the preamble which they haven't gone after yet, which is a fraternity, a bandhuta. And that word, to me, means that if my fellow person, my fellow human being, my fellow Indian is being persecuted, or I should stand up for them even when I don't have any stake in that issue. Even if I'm not a farmer or if I'm not a Muslim, I should be invested in opposing CAA and the farm laws. We don't seem to have the ability to build very large movements which are outside the framework of one community. The Punjab, Haryana farmers, in the case of the farmers' movement, and the Muslim community, especially Muslim women, when it came to CAA. I think because of these successes and the threat it sees to it, that's the reason why the BJP is extremely hostile to civil society and the NGOs. That it's willing to damage India in the process of trying to shut down the civil society as a whole, which it won't be able to, because civil society operates on a different motive, which is not based on a profit. And to see why, in the US, 10% of all private sector jobs are in the NGO sector. That in 25 states out of the 50 states that the US has, NGOs account for more jobs than manufacturing. So this is a sector that is not only productive, but it is part of the wider economy and helps with jobs, with the building of state, with the building of state capacity. The 1.2 crore jobs in all in the US that are part of the NGO sector. Here we are trying to finish it off. And very briefly, for those of you who don't know, that the NGO sector operates under laws which are different from the rest of the private sector. So if the Ambanis raise money from abroad, they are not told how to spend it or where to spend it. The NGO sector, not only that, the NGO sector can only receive and use money out of one bank account, one branch of one bank in Delhi. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kochi or in Surat. You have to go to Delhi, open a State Bank of India account in that one specific branch and operate your money from there. The rest of the corporate sector is not. 80% of the money that the NGO raises abroad, this is the NGO's money. It cannot spend on what the government calls administrative expenses, which includes all salaries, all travel, all rent, all legal, and so on. The rest of the private sector is not told that you can't spend your money in this way. And it has worked that that the state has shut down the operations of quite a few NGOs. And it has meant also that civil society has been kept busy trying to protect itself, or trying to look at, or trying to respond to whatever is in the current week the latest problem, whether it is the jailing of Kejriwal or some new law. In many ways, there was more freedom for civil society to mobilize before 1947 than there is today. So if you look at the mobilizations which made the Congress popular on the issue of MSP, on Indigo in Champaran, or on the issue of corporate monopoly over salt in Dandi, or over high taxation in Bardoli or Kheda, there was the space for people from Bombay, lawyers from Bombay, to go to Gujarat, to go to Bihar and mobilize. It's not there anymore. Given this reality, and I don't think it will change, and the possibility and the likelihood is that it will continue, we must plan for a road ahead after 2024. And this should take into account our strengths, it should take into account our weaknesses, and we do have weaknesses, and our capacity. We must consider also the problem as a whole. I think that because I began with what a Hindu Rashtra was and the limitations of what it could and could not achieve and sought to achieve, we need to offer something bigger in terms of a vision than what is on the table. And I think that India has developed a reflexive hatred for Pakistan, and this has affected our thinking in many ways that are damaging to us. The BJP, of course, it celebrates this sort of hatred against Pakistan because it's able to bring it together with the Indian Muslim and then be able to blame this side. But it's not just the BJP, it has existed before that. Till 2020, we have 14.5 faced China. More than twice that faced Pakistan. And before Galwan, of the Army's 38 divisions, 12 faced China, 25 divisions were deployed against Pakistan. And this is because India didn't think through the fact that the strategic threat came from China and not from Pakistan. It was just this reflexive hatred of the events of 47 and what has come after that, that has addled the mind, so to speak. Why we shifted, after Galwan, why we shifted certain divisions, 16 now face China, was not actually explained. Because that would actually mean having to think about it and tell the people that, oh,
Pakistan is not really the enemy, China might be one. The government doesn't want to do that. We are accustomed to seeing Pakistan as being our enemy. I think it's natural for us. That's one reason why the World Bank, these are World Bank figures, says that inter-regional trade between Pakistan and India it is 20% more expensive for Indian companies to export to a South Asian country, to Pakistan or Bangladesh, than it is for India to export to Brazil, which is halfway across the world. And the reason the World Bank says that it's cheaper to trade with Brazil is that there is a broad trust deficit throughout the region. But why does it exist? Why do we mistrust Bangladesh when it comes to trade? Why do we mistrust Pakistan when it comes to trade? South Asia is the least integrated part of the world when it comes to trade and movement. And the World Bank believes, and these are conservative thinkers who look on prosperity rather than on culture and ideology, that it is our stupidity that is holding us back from being able to trade and have free movement with our neighbors. We should remember that nations do not prosper alone, that regions do, that East Asia, Western Europe, North America, but not South Asia, because we choose to remain closed to one another. But this is not an argument that's made in politics. I think it's an argument that we will have to craft in civil society. Why are we punishing ourselves, both in terms of our federalism, because it's linked, and in terms of our economy, because we believe that our neighbor is the enemy. So just to give you some numbers again, inter-regional trade is 68% in Europe, 60% in East Asia, and 5% in South Asia. So Pakistan doesn't have any capacity to manufacture automobiles. It makes no cars. But it's almost impossible for Mahindra to sell there, or Tata, or Bajaj, or TVS, because we don't want to sell to them. What that has meant is that India has fallen behind in terms of what it could do. So in 1990, a year before the reforms, or the so-called reforms came, India was slightly ahead of China in per capita GDP. So we were at $367 US, nominal US dollars, they were at 317. After 30 years of liberalization, they are 5 times bigger than us, almost 6 times. So the economic system, because these 3 decades came in what we call liberalization, is not the limiting factor. There's something else happening, which is stopping us from replicating the high growth rates that the rest of East Asia saw. In 2022, Modi said that we had entered a 25-year phase, which he called Amrit Kal. He said that the journey of the next 25 years will result in India becoming a developed nation. So the question is whether it can become a developed nation. The answer to that is no, it will not become a developed nation. And I'm not saying this as somebody who can forecast the future. I'm just saying this as somebody who's looked at the last 60 years and what the record has been. So the developed nation, there is no single definition of developed nation, but the US is at $70,000 US per capita. The UK is just under 50,000. Singapore is at 70,000. Japan at 40,000. Korea at 35,000. Let us say that these are exceptional and we can't do this, so maybe we should aim a little lower. So let's say it's $25,000. Can we get to $25,000 by 2047? To answer whether we can or not, we have to ask where we are today. Today we are behind Bangladesh. So in 2014, India was roughly 30% ahead of Bangladesh in per capita GDP terms. We were at roughly about $1,550 US per person per year. They were at $1,100. Today they have gone ahead. They are at 2,800, we are at 2,600. And they are expected to remain in front of us. We can't even compete with Bangladesh. We think we are going to beat China and the US. That is not going to happen. So if we are not in that bracket of 75,000, 50,000, 40,000, where are we? Our bracket is this. Bangladesh, 2,800. India, 2,300 last year. So we are $500 behind Bangladesh now. Pakistan is at $1,600. Sub-Saharan Africa is $1,700, not very far from where we are. Lanka is at 3,300. This is who we are. In Hindi, there's a word called Aakar, which comes from the root word is waqt, time. We should not pretend that to be something we are not, and that we are going to become something that we are not. If we talk about the economy, we have to accept the fact that India has the lowest labor force participation rates in the world. That the United States has 61% of people over 15 are either working or looking for work. In Japan, in China and Vietnam, it's over 70%. It's higher in Pakistan than it is in India. In India, it's 40%. It's not because our young don't want to work. It's that there is no real job for them to be able to spend and invest time and energy in, even in cities where it tends to be gig working and doing the sort of a delivery work that most of our so-called unicorns based, from Dunzo to Blinkit to Swiggy. What are all these? These are just courier companies. People don't want to spend 20 years of, I wouldn't want to spend 20 years of my life doing a job that would be at a dead end. Government data says that unemployment in India doubled for the first time in 2019. This survey was first attacked by the Niti Aayog. The government attacked its own survey. And then after the 2019 results came out, that survey was released without any change. For the first time in India's history, jobs in manufacturing have gone down and jobs in agriculture have gone up for the first time. More people are working in the farm. Economists, including Santosh Mehrotra, believe that this is a proxy for unemployment, that when the surveyor comes to the house and asks, what are you doing? They don't want to say, I don't work. So they say, oh, I work in the field. They're not working on the field because you don't need more people now than you did 5 or 10 years ago in the field, because productivity has gone up in the natural sense, mechanization has gone up. The BJP wanted to shut down Manrega. It is 4 times the size that it was in 2014. And the reason for that is this lack of jobs. Mr. Modi wanted to take manufacturing after, when Make in India was launched, the goal was that manufacturing share of GDP would go from 16% to 25% in 2020. It's gone to 13%. It's actually fallen. This is government data, but it's not spoken about. We don't know how it is that we bring manufacturing to the country. And to be honest, to be fair to the government, there are no 500 million jobs anywhere in the world waiting to be shifted to India. We are not in that phase of the world's economy when that can happen anymore. A couple of more data points on this. The RBI runs a survey in 19 cities. Every 2 months, in 19 cities, the RBI asks people 2 questions in the main. Are you better off than you were 1 year ago, economically? Except for one period in the last 7 years, which is April 2019, every single survey has returned more people saying no. I was not better off last year. I was better off last year than I was today. For 7 years. Once again, data that comes out of the state, but is not debated. Of course, we know that there are 80 crore Indians, 60% of the population, likely more because we haven't done a census, likely should be more, since 2011, who have to be given 5 kilos, who need and should be given 5 kilos of free grain every month. I looked at some global indices, including ones that were controlled by conservative bodies, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, Davos, the Cato Institute, the Lowy Institute, the Economist, the Failed States Index. On 42 out of 48, India has fallen since 2014. And the government first tried to push back saying, oh, the data might be faulty, something's going on, something's wrong. But then once the bad news didn't stop coming, the government stopped engaging with it, including the UN, which says that the that we have fallen behind the rest of even South Asia when it comes to things like hunger. To begin my conclusion, so under Modi, the political defeat of Muslims that Upadhyay wanted has been achieved. I think that we have defeated, Hindus have defeated Muslims. What should we expect now? The answer is more of the same. There's nothing else. They don't have anything else to offer. And that is dangerous because, not only because of the fact that we are dividing our country deliberately, but also, as I said, as I laid out, there is no real plan to make most of India or large parts of India prosperous and take it out of real poverty. There's no plan. More of the same means that there is no plan, that we will continue doing what we are doing, because if governance is done purely through catchphrase and slogan, real delivery will never be the point on which the government either judges itself or asks to be judged. So we have to offer, and by we I mean civil society, we have to offer another vision of what this country, what this subcontinent ought to be. One that resists majoritarianism in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is the only country in South Asia to not have discriminatory law and to have a minority in its cabinet. It's not India. The Bangladesh constitution opens with Bismillah Rahman Rahim, but it doesn't have any other phrase in it which makes it a religious constitution. India has included a religion in so many laws, including CAA, that we have fallen second to Bangladesh, with Pakistan coming third, because there obviously discrimination is written into law. So we have to offer the subcontinent a vision of what we can and should be, and not continue down this path that's ruinous. We need to be able to there is no running away from it, because this is the way of the world, that if you look at open trade in East Asia, or you look at open borders in Western Europe, this is the modern world. We are choosing deliberately not to engage with it. A world in which East Punjab and West Punjab can trade freely, and East Bengal and West Bengal can travel freely, and families across the LOC can meet freely. We can correct our problems both with minorities and with federalism if we choose to have this vision of a more relaxed South Asia, less nationalistic, less inward focused in its nationalism. And in this vision, again, to go back to something Suresh said, I think we have an ally in our young, that they are less inclined to listen to authority when it comes to, and less gullible, I think, in accepting the kind of arguments we were force-fed when we were their age, because we didn't have access to the kind of information they did. And I think that telling them you cannot eat this, or this is the person you cannot love, or this is where you cannot live, or this is where you cannot work, will be slightly more difficult than it was for us. Finally, I think civil society's greatest strength is its ability and desire to cooperate, that it's easy for us, for me certainly, as somebody who works in civil society, to work with somebody from Pakistan or from Bangladesh. It's natural. It doesn't feel strange. It doesn't feel hostile. Or somebody from Kashmir. And because we choose to cooperate, we don't compete. We have the capacity to build coalitions that can be almost infinitely big in scope and in nature. This is something that we ought to see ourselves doing if the battle is as large as it is, and I think it is very large, and as long as it is going to last, and I think it's going to last very long. Also, I think I shouldn't be seen as speaking for myself, but I think that we are motivated by things that don't involve personal benefit, that we are unified in common goals. And this is the sort of strength that can be utilized and deployed because I think that the crisis we face concerns more than just one generation. I think it's the biggest thing that we have faced since 1947, and it cannot be resolved by just leaving it to voting or having one party leave power. It's much larger. No society can permanently hate itself and damage itself in the way that you cannot hope to exclude and damage 15% of your body without damaging the body itself. Jews in 1930s Germany, the Weimar Republic, were less than 1% of the population. The Uyghur in China, who are also persecuted, are less than 1% of the population. There are 12 billion people in a nation of 1.4 billion. We have 200 million Muslims, maybe more. You can't persecute them continually without persecuting yourself, without damaging yourself. And in the last century, the arc of humankind has been, in a sense, away from war towards greater integration, whether in East Asia or in Europe. I think India can both be the greatest example of this and the greatest beneficiary of this. And it is our job to convince this generation that a better future is not just possible, but it's also within reach. Thank you very much.
So Aakar has said that he's open to taking questions, responses, comments. So if any of you want to ask any question, thanks Aakar for a very interesting framework. You traversed all the way from Kerala to South Asia to the whole world. And the final thing that the youth are perhaps less to hold themselves to, more readily understand any law which is seeking to put fetter on food, marriage, dress. The younger people may probably more be ready to fight it than some of us older people. You know, how do we mobilize them? In what manner do we reach out to them? And the nation can't be at war with itself and hope to survive. How do we take this message to people? I mean, these are issues that you have put up. So anyway, the floor is open for comments, questions. What we can do, Aakar, is okay. We can take 2-3 people commenting, and then he can give a comment. So more people can speak. Please introduce yourself.
It's not necessary. Have you looked into the scope of civil society working with Panchayat Raj institutions as it is presently designed by the Constitution Amendment and the Panchayat Raj Act?
Thank you, sir. Any other?
As per the Constitution, judiciary has power to eliminate any illegal laws. Then why the judiciary is keeping mum? Because you are telling so many illegal laws came, and still, when the judiciary has got such power, why it is keeping silent?
There's somebody in the back.
If you could introduce yourself also.
I'm Prashant Sundar. I'm a lawyer practicing here, also part of a civil society organization called the Hosptial. We are now seeing a series of cases where the civil society is being demonized. Organizations called names, we all call Arpanaxas, Damodaran TVs, then the Khan Market and whatever. So it's a case of entire group of organizations, people being kind of demonized. We're seeing this for the minorities, we are not seeing it for civil society. But how do we really find this? How do we really make people understand? Because it's an entire section of society being kind of dominant. How do we really find that?
Thanks.
Okay. Joy Kandway, an engineer. It's very crucial because is going to get a majority in the lots of states are going to drastically change the constitution. What are we to do in such a situation?
was centered, it had various other leaders, John Fernandez, a whole lot. And that, I also introduced myself as a congressman. Though emergency was fought for liberties, by people being organized, a common man, organized by a few people who had the courage to go and lead. Now, in this context, we are in the Modi's second term or going into the third term, where Hindutva is supreme. It pervades all facets of our life, especially in the North. It has an established cadre, going by the RSS roots, which supports the other Hindu organizations that keep it abreast. Last time, almost 50%, they polled 50% of the votes, and none dare speak against them. Now let's look at Bihar.
Can you come to your question?
Yes, it's not would would there be, can a person come to lead out? Because from the people's liberties, right over the JP movement, can there be a movement led by a few? Because that is the only hope.
Thank you. I would consider, I'll just go down the questions as I've written them. I would consider the panchayats to be part of civil society and not part of government. That they are institutions that lie between the individual and the state. It is true that they control some power, but it's true also that they would see themselves as being a citizen. I would encourage those of you who haven't seen Bhavar Meghvanshi's talk or read his book to see his views on this. It is true that the Constitution gives the constitutional courts, which is the High Courts and the Supreme Court, the right to strike down laws that they find in violation. It is also true that our judges are drawn from the same pool of people as we are, and we should expect that the relative smallness of civil society or the relative smallness of liberal thinking will be reflected in that middle class pool from which they are drawn. They will be naturally conservative. Hopefully they would look at the law. But unfortunately the trend has been and this is specific to matters of bail, that they tend to favor the executive over the rights of the individual. How do you fight back against demonization? I think that one of the good things about our time is that not all media is formally controlled and top down. And I'm saying this as somebody who has worked for most of his life in formal media where it has been top down. That social media gives the rest of us a dog in the fight, that you can, through something attractive, through something meaningful, be able to reach a very large number of people, which you would not have been able to do 15, 20 years ago. That ought to be used. And I think while it does have its negatives, it also, social media does have its positives, and I think this would be one of them. I have something which says charge sheet, but I don't know what that question was. The second last question?
Mr. Joy had 2025.
Change in constitution.
Oh, yes. So I don't see the constitution changing because the BJP doesn't need to make any changes. Within the flexibility of what the constitution calls reasonable restrictions and reasonable classification. So though CAA is prima facie in violation of 14, which gives every person in India, not just every citizen, the right to equality, lawyers like Salve believe that there is a sufficient case to be made for reasonable classification. And as we know in PUCL, I'm a member of PUCL Karnataka, Article 19 exists only on the book. It doesn't exist in the physical spaces. You don't have the right to a peaceful assembly. You certainly don't in Bangalore. You can only gather in some places at a particular time if the police says yes on a particular cause. We wanted Ram Guha to come and speak on something, and the commissioner said no. So somebody said, "What are you worried about? That the audience will die of boredom?" That seems to be the greatest threat. But so, given that, I don't think they need to really change anything. Do they, in any sense, want to get like only Brahmins and Kshatriyas to do? I don't think that will work. Today, the largest part of India's population, the plurality of people would be from my caste, the Shudra, whether it's the Gaudas, the Lingayats, the Patels, the Jats, the Patils, the Reddys. We are not going to stand by and let these people take power away from us. One of us is the Prime Minister, actually. So I don't see any structural change that reflects the smriti in the Constitution. What I would see is more of the same, that they would use these loopholes to be able to insert, to make the gutting of 370 legitimate or to make CAA lawful. The last question, I am personally not a fan of messianism and strong leadership. And I don't think that good things come out of such things. I'm not saying what happened in the 75-77 period was not right or not good. But to my mind, it's better to have consensual, broad-based, slow-moving, and that's fine, systems rather than mercurial, passionate, very high energy ones that are centered around one or two individuals.
Thanks. Can we have the younger people raising questions? The uniformity in the first round was all of them were.
Can I say one question?
Yeah, please.
Do you think that most of the media and journalists and social activists stand for liberty, justice without political vested interests?
Thanks, Jack Prakash. Can we have some more?
My name is Monica. My question is, four pillars of democracy, which and everything is getting destroyed. Media has no power now, their voice has no credibility. So everything like court, if there is no democracy means there's no use of court, there's no use of advocacy also. Like newspapers, there's been no value for newspapers also. Like that, all pillars of democracy has been destroyed. How do you think we can regain that old days of our good constitution and good days of democracy?
Please.
Sir, how effective are the...
Your name, please.
Philip. How effective are these pressures that come from the international bodies like UN? And the government has been countering that quite a lot. Are they being fair enough to do that? Since we having a lot of human rights violations happening.
I wanted to understand how is it different.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Ritu. I work in Bangalore. My native is in talking. How is it different right now in the current after 2014 by working as chair of Amnesty? You must have worked before in the UPA. What was the difference? What is the main difference that you see?
difference from the earlier protest or something that we never addressed the caste issues. But now I think this is the time to address to the caste, because this 10-year Modi government has really destroyed all the special rights to all minorities, and we don't have any minority rights, special minority rights, the reservation is converted to EWS, that also. So I think it's, apart from Mandal, we never addressed the main issue of India, that is caste-based politics. And what about you think that how will it play on this fight?
I think that on the question of the media, we have always had this that needs to be converted into opinion. So the big divide in a newsroom of a newspaper would be between the pages that deal with fact, which is the news pages in the front, and the opinion pages and the op-eds in the middle, that filter the news but tell the readership and tell the state what it thinks ought to be done or ought not to be done. To my mind, the natural extension of that is to act. If you believe that putting Kejriwal in jail is wrong and you're doing it in misuse of the enforcement directorate, there should be some action from the newspaper or from the journalist in support of this belief. It could be joining a PIL. It could be as simple as that. But to my mind, there is no real distinction, and I'm not one of those who thinks that journalists should not be activists. On the question of the pillars, I think that it's a definition. It's one definition, but I think that space at the moment exists. It's true that the judiciary does not favor individual liberties, particularly on bail, but it does sort of infrequently, at least every so often, give a judgment that is good. I think on the bonds we had that. We had as clear a judgment as we could have expected, and a good one. So I think we shouldn't let go of these spaces. India is not China or North Korea. We have some limited right to peaceful assembly. We should use that. We have some limited right to access the justice system. We should use that. Effective pressure externally. So I'll give a couple of examples. So India had an internet blockade in Kashmir after Article 370 was gutted, which lasted 17 months. Kashmiri children were the only part of the world to spend spend COVID with no access to schooling, because they did not have internet. There was no online schooling, and there was this a congresswoman in Washington, the state, not the District of Columbia, who wrote up a motion. It's called House Resolution 745. Those of you who are interested in it can read it. It's not very long. It was tabled. It got the support of about 5 dozen Democrats in the House. Their house is roughly the size of our Lok Sabha. And it got the support of a couple of people from the Republican Party. This was at the time when Donald Trump was still the president. It didn't go anywhere. But within 2 weeks of Trump losing and Biden being sworn in, the government of India lifted the blockade. Now, is it the case that there was a quid pro quo? I don't know. This government is pretty opaque. You don't know why it does what it chooses to do. But my guess is that there was some element of pressure that they wanted to avoid. So it worked in that instance. The European Parliament in 2020, February, I think it was, or January, tabled a very condemnatory motion against CAA. It was not voted on because Jaishankar went to Brussels, and we don't know what the deal was. But I suppose one thing he would have told them is, don't vote on it. I'll make sure that it's not implemented till the end of our term, which appears to be the case, and which appears to be what happened. So it did work in that instance also. It doesn't work in a lot of instances because India is a big power. India is seen as a pivot and is willing to lend itself as a pivot against China, unfortunately. And therefore, so long as that happens, we will continue to be used by the West on such things. And I think human rights is not on the top of anybody's list of priorities. So we should not assume that beyond the point the world will take an interest, but having said that, we should try nonetheless. I don't think that a government that commits crimes against its own people gets a pass merely because it's a democracy and you cannot, as citizens, ask somebody else to help you. I think we should. The difference between the UPA and the present government under Modi, very broadly speaking, for civil society, it's been a devastating shift. That for those of you who don't know the space, FCRA is a Congress law. FCRA is a law, very strangely, that was aimed at political parties. What happened in 2017 is that the Delhi High Court convicted the BJP and the Congress of illegally receiving money from a foreign entity, which was Vedanta. So the law was retrospectively changed by Jaitley to get the political parties out of the FCRA and to leave the NGOs in it. So by no means should we assume that things were good under the Congress. They were not. But the viciousness that these people have is of another order. That if you look at civil society, signal groups and WhatsApp groups, a lot of our friends can't answer because they are in jail. That has never happened. For Suresh and I, you go down the list of contacts, many of them will not. Outside of systemic education, I think, and I have learned this as I've grown sort of older, that people who are oppressed, whether it's Dalits or Muslims, or they tend to be more aware of their rights and what to do about them than people like me who want to educate themselves on how it is that the world can become better. And I say this because I was part of a tribunal that was hosted in Delhi by my friend Aakar Patel, who runs a group, a national group on Dalits, on Dalit rights, I should say. And the tribunal consisted of us. There was a friend of mine, Farah, and this judge. And we heard Dalits from Tamil Nadu, from Orissa, from Kerala, talk about their experiences. Very poor people, most of them. There was a child that I remember, maybe 6 or 7 years old. For both the days of the tribunal, she was wearing her school uniform. They had come from Rajasthan, and it did not occur to me that these were the only clothes she had, which is why she wore them on board those days. They seem to be very aware of the law, the SC/ST, Prevention of Atrocities. And they had, for the most part, not received any formal education. So I don't know what that motivating spirit is, but I would certainly agree that it does exist outside of systemic education. It is true that we have not allowed, that the caste has not been as big a focus as minorities in the religious sense have. And I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to explain to myself why. One reason I think is that constitutionally, India tried to make its peace with the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes through reservations, that having rejected Ambedkar's separate electorates, that you do have seats, so you do have representation in parliament no matter which government is in charge, which comes from those two communities. It might not be effective representation because many feel that you're still beholden to your party. Muslims don't have that. They have never been represented to the extent of their population, and now it's much more. That's one. I think the the lack of application of the Prevention of Atrocities Act is an act of omission, which is very wrong and shouldn't happen. The laws that the BJP has brought after 2014 are acts of a commission. It's choosing to agitate the nation and the state. I think that would probably explain why the focus is more here than there.
You told that social media is liberal. It's a misquote. Social media is our
different opinions on this. In the last set of questions, some of the younger ones can I ask? Anybody else? Sorry. No.
The question is that the present ruling party has two faces. Like one is that of the religious fanaticism, and other is the corporate gigantism. Both are two faces of the fascism itself. But against which we have to, or you consider that, or against which we have to react.
Somebody else.
So this is regarding...
Your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Sudhakar. I'm a former scientist and now a social worker. This is regarding persecution against Christians in North. You know the rules and the law system exists, but most of them we see first they have been attacked and then later on the further consequences. It's been rampant in North, especially there is no freedom for Christians to worship. You know, we can worship wherever we want, even in the houses. But we don't see that freedom. It's been oppressed and it's been very much forced. And Christians have been harassed in many ways. And we don't see much of legal, kind of fight against these things.
Hi, my name is Damodaran from Bangalore. So if I may read out my question. So in the background of things like electoral bonds and how the biggest corporations are hand in hand with the government, we are seeing an era where facts are invented and the corporate media subverts the truth to serve their corporate interests. And much of the world, it seems, is moving towards fascism and authoritarianism, especially because of this role of the media and shadowy financial elites behind it. So my question is, can we realistically challenge fascism, authoritarianism, communalism, and this divide and conquer type of thing without addressing the role of capital? It seems like the society is economically failing and fascism is a useful way for the financial class to maintain control. So how can we work for lasting change when we are up against the inherent self-protective mechanisms of capital?
I'll conflate the first and third question. So it is a fact that civil society, in the meaning of the word that I hold, is not very good at the non-human rights side of violations. There are some of us who are very good at the extractives side of it. If you have a Thoothukudi or you have something like that in terms of mining. But the fact is that India is a smaller economy than Germany's. But India has more billionaires now than Germany does. India's economy is 1/5 and most likely 1/6 the size of China's, but the two richest Asians are Gujarati men. It should tell us that there's something happening. The Economist runs something called a crony capitalism index. What it does is it takes a look at a country's GDP and says what proportion of it comes out of extractives or dependence on the state, which would mean coal, ports, mining, and such things, spectrum. And India was at 3% in 2016 and it's gone to over 8% now in the last 8 years. So it is a fact that this country is being controlled If you look at media, the most reputable journalist in Indian broadcasting history is a man called Raghav Bell. Denied a license to operate a news channel because he was seen as a security threat. The most reputable, longest serving broadcast journalist in this country, Prannoy Roy, hounded by the ED, had to forcibly sell his stake to one of those two Gujaratis who also owns a Network 18 now. So there's absolute capture that if you look at the thesis forwarded by Arvind Subramaniam, who was the chief economic advisor to Modi, he says that it's very dangerous for India to be under the control of what he calls the 2A syndrome, which is the Adani-Ambani syndrome. But it's a fact. There is no pushback against it. There is no way to stop them from going in and squeezing out every other competitor from the sectors that they go into. I think India's constitution is in some ways a fraud. That Article 25 was gifted to India specifically because the Christians asked for the right to propagate. There was a debate on this, and there's this man called Frank Anthony, who used to run these schools, who told the Hindus that it's an article of faith for Christians to spread the word of Christ. It is not just belief. It is their religion to tell people that this is how you'll get saved. You may or may not choose to believe that. That's a separate thing. The Constitution framers agreed with Frank Anthony and gave that right to the Christians. If you read the debates, it is written as, it turns out that not only was 25 meant for Christians, it seems to be meant specifically and only for them. Muslims on the side do not proselytize in the sense of the word of convert. In case you didn't know, even the Tablighi Jamaat seeks to make better Muslims out of Muslims. The Christians are the ones who want to, and we gave them that right in 25, and then India is the only country in the world where a fundamental right is also a criminal offense. So, government is saying, Jao, spread the word of Christ. The moment you do it, you're in jail. So, this case called Stanislaus came also, of course, during the Congress's time. But I should say this, that we had a very good report, by we I mean PUCL Karnataka, on the attacks on churches in Karnataka in 2021, I think it was. So it's not just in North India. I think the persecution, once you have this poison injected into society, mobs will take over. You don't need the state to be able to harass the population. The mob will do the job pretty sort of effectively and is doing.
Chhattisgarh has also come up with a compendium of attacks on churches and the way it has happened. So this is just thanks, Aakar. I'd like to call upon Tanuja from PUCL Kerala to deliver the vote of thanks. Before that, I should also say, I should also inform you all that Aakar spent quite a long time standing. He's got an injury on his foot. I was really worried whether he'd be able to come and talk. So on behalf of all of us, thanks. Before that, one more thing. I'd like to introduce Mr. Balamurugan. He's come from Coimbatore only for this lecture. He and 3 other friends. He is the National Secretary, one of the National Secretaries of PUCL. From Coimbatore. He's come from Coimbatore.
Well, since we've come to the end of the talk, although reluctantly so, because I am sure there are a lot of more questions that are possibly pending. Yet, sir, for the wake-up call, I would rather think of it as a wake-up call that you have given. We are entirely grateful. And of course, for the time that you spent standing, despite the pain and the trouble that you have been going through, we are grateful for that, sir. And we would also like to also mention that as PUCL Kerala, where we are yet again trying to spread our wings after a small dormant period. This was an appropriate address. This was an appropriate wake-up call, because we are definitely hoping that we would have more of you, all those who raised questions, all those who have started thinking again. We would like to bring us all together and start a movement, a mobilization, so to speak. And so we thank you for your contribution here, sir, for your time. Well, we would have to thank Dr. Suresh, although he was the initiator. He is the initiator, but we still thank you, sir, for your effort and your commitment. Even today, even this evening earlier, we were having a discussion, and he was very passionately telling us how we would have to be more organized and more passionately, fervently following up with a lot more people. We definitely need more youngsters with us, because I believe he encouraged, saying that even in Karnataka, he came across the fact that more than a large number of, a good percentage of PUCL members in Karnataka are amongst 40 plus. Yes, so 40 minus. So that is an impetus. Thank you, sir, for taking us along. And Balamurugan, sir, we are grateful that you took the trouble to travel all the way from Coimbatore, although he was present on and off on a number of occasions whenever we have joined. So thank you, sir, for your commitment and your kindness towards us as we take baby steps again. I have to also extend thanks to Chandrasekhar, sir, who takes time out of his schedule and fulfills his responsibility as our leader here. So thank you, Chandrasekhar, sir, for bringing us this opportunity. But before I close, let me extend my gratefulness to all of you who are here at this time. Realistically speaking, we were hoping that we would have the chairs filled, but we do have the chairs filled. And we are really happy that you are here. But before I close, I would also request that all those of you who are here, would you kindly reach out to us? We would be here. You can definitely take our phone numbers. We would like to carry on the dialogue, and I believe it is the need of the hour, just as we heard today. So thank you once again, all of you, for taking out this evening, Saturday evening, and being with us. Thank you.